Mick, I've been thinking about buffers.
Oh, God. Maybe I'll understand it this time. Well, I think that was pretty conclusive, don't you?
I think we can end the show there.
Yeah.
Bang.
Boom.
Hey everyone, welcome to That Pedal Show. Dan here.
Mick here. Hello.
Today we're talking about buffers.
Oh, goody.
Now, before, everyone says, oh no, a buffer show.
Another buffer show.
What we want to do is try and demystify it a bit, and by the end of the show, we'll never have to talk about it again. That's the goal. That's the plan.
And the reason for that is whenever we talk about buffers, and we've done 2 or 3 shows on buffers in the past, or certainly had them as major parts of certain other shows, and the comment section is pretty much always the same afterwards. Yep. A confusion of misunderstanding, perhaps down to the fact we haven't explained it very well. I don't actually understand it at all. He does. So we're going to try to make that not happen.
We'll have a go.
By the end of the video, answer the questions. Why do I need a buffer? And where does it go on my pedalboard?
Indeed.
Is that fair enough?
That's very fair.
I think it would be really handy, Dan, if we had a sort of everyday, easy to understand analogy.
I like those. So, what we heard in the beginning of the video, Mick had a short cable going to the amplifier, and it was all lovely and chimey and bright. Then there was a long cable, and we lost a lot of that top end. All right, things got a bit duller, a bit darker. So I want you to think of your guitar cable as a garden hose, right? And every 10 centimeters of this garden hose, we've got a little pinprick in there, and it just leaks a little bit of water, right? If we double the amount of garden hose, we double the pinpricks, right? And then whatever we have left with at the end is what we get to water on our flowers, okay? But if we have a really long garden hose with all these pinpricks, the longer the hose, the more we lose.
Yeah.
All right? What the buffer does is if we have a massive long garden hose, it's like a little water pump, our power shower, as it were, that we can stick in the middle of the garden hose to say, I want to get, more out, I want to lose less water.
Yeah.
So we get as much out as we put in, basically.
Yeah, and you can have a pump at the beginning and one at the end, or you can have them at varying points all the way along the hose.
Exactly.
It's nice, I like it. So it's enabling more of that water to end up coming out of the pipe.
Yeah.
In a stronger fashion.
But yeah, basically. I mean, it's not the perfect analogy, but, it gives you a visualization of basically what that buffer does.
Indeed. So, okay, it's not water. We don't want to be pouring water down our guitar cables into our amps. So I think, what is a buffer and where do we find them?
Indeed. Roll VT. Where do we find buffers? Of course, we find them in effects pedals, and sometimes they'll have multiple buffers in their design. But we also find them in things like active guitar pickups, in preamps and outboard gear, in wireless systems, and of course, we find buffers in standalone buffer pedals. The more difficult question is, what exactly is a buffer? Our guitar signal is very small, it's very complex, and it's also very fragile. The purpose of the buffer is to take this fragile signal and make it more robust, so it can deal with things like long cable runs and deal with the input of our amplifiers and effects pedals. So how does it do this? It does this by changing the impedance of our guitar signal from a high impedance to a lower impedance. So think of it as a one-to-one impedance changing device. It's not a gain changing device. It doesn't boost the signal. It keeps the signal the same level. It just changes the impedance. So let's deal with that term impedance, and you'll hear it thrown around all over the place. There's quite a lot to it. And if you really want to get to understand impedance and how to calculate impedance, then there's a world of information out there. You need to understand AC theory and all that stuff. But as far as we're concerned, impedance is a combination of resistance and reactance, both capacitive reactance and inductive reactance. It's the stuff that impedes our guitar signal, or the stuff that impedes the flow of electrons in our guitar signal. Cables are a really good example. There's a relationship that exists between the center of our cable where our guitar signal flows and the earth around the outside, and part of our signal will leak down to earth. And it's the capacitance in the cable that makes that happen. So high frequency can be lost down that cable. Now, if we think about the capacitance in the cable, it works very similar to the capacitance in our tone control. When we dial the tone control in, we're letting more of that signal from the capacitor flow to ground. We are bleeding more top end off. Same thing in our cable. If we have, say, a meter of cable, and over that meter of cable, we've got, say, 15 picofarads of capacitance. If we double the length of that cable, we will double the capacitance. So we'll have 30 picofarads of capacitance. Therefore, we're more susceptible to losing our top end if we're driving that cable with something with a relatively high output impedance, like a guitar pickup. When we lower that signal impedance, it's much less affected by the capacitance in the cable. We are buffering our signal to allow it to deal with the capacitance in the cable. Now, when it comes to buffers in our effects pedals, this is where it gets interesting. No doubt you'll have heard the term true bypass and buffered effects pedals. Now, this only relates to the state of the pedal when it's off. Let me give an example. If we take a Boss effects pedal, for example, the signal goes in. The first thing it does is go through a buffer, and then it'll go through the rest of the circuit of the pedal, and then through an output buffer. This is true whether the pedal is turned on or off. It's always seeing those two buffers. But if we look at something like a true bypass pedal, true bypass relates to the state of the pedal when it's off. When it's off, it bypasses that entire circuit, so it doesn't see any buffers. However, it doesn't change what's going on when the pedal is on. 99% of the time, there's a buffer in that pedal. So the state true bypass or buffered only relates to the state of the pedal when it's off, not when it's on. So let's have a look at an example. Yeah, so interesting.
Very interesting.
The true bypass and buffered thing, a lot of confusion, all right? So,
well, if you remember the pedal revolution of the 90s,
yes,
when kind of nicely designed analog stomp boxes started becoming cool again.
Mm-hmm.
True bypass was held up as this bastion of must-have.
But yeah, the solve all thing.
Wouldn't it be good, Dan, if we had two overdrives, one that was true bypass and one that wasn't?
Be perfect. Be perfect.
It's almost like he planned it.
Okay, well, we've got a couple of stalwarts. We've got the TS9 and we've got the old Proco Rat. Okay, one of them is true bypass, one of them isn't.
Yeah.
Let's see if you can hear which one it is.
Okay, am I playing again then?
Yeah.
Oh, would you like to play, Dan?
You know what? I'm good. I'd like to...
I know you're good. Would you like to play?
Now you'll notice it's off. There it is on. There it is off. And then here we have the Rat. Okay, so we're just going to switch between these two.
Okay.
I've turned all the knobs down.
Yeah.
So we're not actually hearing the circuit. We're just hearing them in their bypass state.
Until this point in the video, we still have not heard a pedal turned on. They're all turned off.
Magic.
As they still are.
Yeah.
I'll play the same thing to begin with, just so we've got grounds for comparison on the position 4.
Let's throw in, so at the moment, we've got the cable going into the tube screamer and then the rat going into 30-footer cable. Let's throw another 30-footer cable, just in case that wasn't clear enough.
Yeah.
We're going to throw another 30-footer cable in.
So our total cable run now is 15 feet, a bit of other stuff, let's say 2 feet of patch cables, and then 30 feet. So we were 46 feet of cable or thereabouts. Now we're going to be 76 feet of cable.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So here is our rat, and then I'm going to add the extra cable in. So I've got 30 feet of cable in a loop in G3.
Yeah.
Right?
Just before we do this, just want to say that G3 has got no buffers turned on. It is completely inert in all of this. You are only hearing the stuff we have got on screen.
Indeed.
I sincerely hope what's hitting my ears will be heard equally successfully by the microphones.
Yeah.
Because the difference is staggering where I'm sat.
Yeah. Night and day.
So the more cable we add,
Yes.
with no buffer,
Yes.
we've lengthened our garden hose.
We have.
And we've got no water pump.
Indeed.
What I'm noticing, is a dramatic loss of top end.
Yes. When we are through the rat pedal.
Yes.
Yes.
But we add the water pump
We add the water pump because what we're doing, we're adding that buffer in, pushing past all of that leaky hose, and getting the signal that hits the water pump out the other end.
Yeah. And just to nail that on, the Ibanez TS9 Tube Screamer is non-true bypass. It has a buffer in the circuit when it's off.
Yep.
The Rat is true bypass and does not have a buffer in the circuit when it's off. Remember, all these pedals are off. All we were doing were adding more cable.
Exactly.
Fascinating.
Indeed.
Okay. I think we need some science.
Let's do some science.
Roll VT.
So it's important to remember that nothing really lives in isolation. Everything affects everything else. So a good example of this, we talk a lot about the effects of the capacitance in the cable and the top end loss. But when we change that capacitive effect, not only does it change the top end in the cable, but it can affect things like what's happening with our guitar. Let's consider our guitar pickup. It's a coil of copper wrapped around a magnet, and that coil has an inductance value. Now, what the inductor does, it's an ability to store and release charge, and it acts basically opposite to a capacitor, right? If it's a high-end filter. So the less inductance our pickup has, the less top-end roll-off we have directly from the pickup. But not only that, the inductor will have what we call the resonant frequency, and it's where the capacitive reactance and the inductive reactance basically cancel each other out. And all you're left with is the pure resistance. And at that point, at that frequency, there's less resistance, and we get this little frequency spike. Now, in a pickup, if we have a very short cable after that, then the frequency will sit in a certain spot. But if we introduce capacitance, say from a long cable, that frequency will actually move down the spectrum. So we can tune that resonant frequency by the capacitance in the circuit. It's a very similar thing that happens in a wah pedal, right? We have our resonant frequency from our little inductor, and then the treadle operates as like a variable capacitor, and we tune where that frequency sits. Same thing. It's not changing the resonant frequency of the pickup. It changes the resonant frequency of the circuit. As we add that capacitance in, it will move that frequency down. So here's the question. when you're listening to these things, what are you hearing? Are you hearing a bright guitar, or are you hearing the pickup's ability to push through the capacitance of the cable? Are you hearing a dark guitar, or are you hearing a cable that has loaded the inductance of the pickup? It has moved that resonant frequency down. There's so much to consider with this stuff. In the end, it's just about using your ears and working out what sounds best. Buffers are a problem solver, but what you need to do is work out, is there a problem to solve in your rig? Right, let's hear some buffers. And we're back in the room.
That was fascinating.
Yes, it is fascinating.
I haven't filmed it yet, but I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, like I said, we're giving you an overview of that side of things, but if you really want to dive into this, there's so much more that you can do. Right, we have 7 buffers that we're going to run through.
YouTube's algorithm, this is for you.
Very good.
It's one of the most scintillating things we've ever done, I think, Dan.
Yeah, I think so. I get very excited about this stuff. So basically, we've got a whole bunch of different buffers, from valve buffers, op-amp buffers, JFET buffers, you know, and we're going to have a listen to them. And I want to see, so all we're going to hear to start with is just guitar, buffer into the amplifier.
Okay.
Okay? And I want you to see which one you like the most. Now, as we go through them, we'll put the tech specs up on the screen. All right? I don't want to spend too much time delving into them, but basically, they've all got a different input impedance, output impedance, a different signal to noise ratio, and different headroom levels.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
That's already sparking a few questions in
Exactly. So we'll get this up on the screen, but for the moment,
yeah,
we're just going to listen to them.
Okay.
All
I
right?
might just get the 2-rock a bit happier.
You do that.
Just so that I'm just going to make it a little bit more dynamic. I'm going to add in a bit more front end and might even just put it onto high power mode, just so that I feel good, Dan.
Okay, mate. Okay.
So let's see if these settings on the old 2-rock are making me happy or not.
Okay.
It's going to be a cleanish sound. Definitely don't hate that.
It's good to know. Right. So the first one we're going to have a look at is the Flying Buttress. The Flying Buttress, which is a Kingsley valve buffer.
I do want to hear him with an overdrive pedal as well in a minute.
We will do.
Yep.
We totally will do. But at the moment, I just want you to go through. We've got the 7.
Yeah, let's just whack through them.
We'll go through them and then see. Yeah, let's just go through them to start with, and then we'll get some questions.
I'm just going to. I don't know what I'm going to play, but let's see what happens. for all of that,
Yep.
I had volume right up on the neck pickup. Can we just very quickly flip through them again? I've gone on to position 4 and I've turned the guitar volume down just a touch.
No worries.
Okay. Valve one,
Right.
the op amp and the clon
Okay.
are my favourites.
Very interesting. What's interesting about that is the op amp and the clon, they're both op amps.
Okay,
And
I
they're
did,
actually quite a similar design.
genuinely didn't know that.
Right, there you go. Yeah.
Didn't like the single J FET.
Okay, interesting.
The one that I felt the one that worked best with the guitar down was the clon.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we can tell. So, okay, very interesting. So the clon and the op amp, really high impedance on the input,
Ha!
right? So, again, that sort of retaining that
Yeah.
that sparkly bit or whatever. But yeah,
Do us a favour.
Yep.
Can you turn them all off?
sure.
Fascinating.
Right?
Fascinating.
Yeah, man.
We're going to come on to discuss this in more detail, I am sure. But so what the buffer's doing is it's making it sound like there's less cable,
Yeah.
but it's also meaning that when I turn the guitar volume down, it stays brighter,
Yes.
which for Strat players is something that you'll be really interested in. I mean, we could talk about treble bleed mods, we could talk about the other ways to achieve this, but this is the simplest way possible, and it sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you know, as a fan of I've always said I don't really like buffers because I don't like what they do, maybe what we're going to go for next.
Sure.
Actually, that benefit of having just a bit more latitude out of your volume control on the guitar is
Yep.
staggering.
Totally. Yep, totally.
Utterly staggering.
Yep. So what I want to do quickly is so it seems like, okay, if I've got long cable, right, let's say my pedal board's right at the front of the stage and I've got all this cable going to the back, buffers are a really good shout, right, to keep the consistency.
Just out of interest, you don't have that extra cable in at the moment, do you?
No, I don't. I can put that in.
No, we're 45 feet of cable.
We're 45
which
feet of cable.
I think is, if you've got guitar, pedal board, amp, that's not unusual.
No. But remember, we've got the cable from the guitar to the pedal board. So that doesn't change.
Yeah.
What's changing is everything after that.
Yeah,
So we're
okay.
keeping it consistent up to that point, and then everything after that, right?
So if you've got active pickups and the buffer's in the thing, that's where it starts there.
Exactly.
That explains so much.
Exactly that. Exactly
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Exactly that. But I just want to quickly do one last thing,
Yep.
and we're going to go through and going to turn all the buffers on.
Okay.
Because there's a question about how many buffers in the signal,
Yep.
you know, what's going to happen. So let's have a quick listen.
Seemed like more compression with them all on.
Yeah.
And that was something I could hear and feel.
Right. So what's happening? You've got a high impedance input, right? So the guitar is hitting that high impedance. Then we've got a low impedance output, hitting a high impedance, hitting a low impedance output, high impedance. So, I mean, what's really interesting is it does, like even with there were 8 buffers on there, right? And everything from valve buffer, op-amp buffer, JFET buffers, you know, in the TU2 and the TS9, you've got an input and an output buffer.
Yeah.
So you're turning on 2 buffers with each one of those. But at the end of, with all those buffers turned on, I mean, it's not horrific. But it definitely changes. You've got to add up all of the noise floor with all those.
Yeah.
Right. But then you've got to take into account you're going through all those different gain stages. And it does change that feel of compression that you said. You know, it does make a difference, but it's not as if it's suddenly a horrific mess that a lot of people think going through.
No.
You know, but
what was interesting for me was that I guess the assumption would be that if you just add more buffers, you get more of everything. So it just gets, but there's only so much. For example, high end in the
original signal
everywhere anyway. So you can't. Your buffer is, as hopefully Dan explained in one of the VTs, it's not an amplifier. It doesn't have an EQ section.
Exactly.
It's simply putting back what's lost rather than adding anything new.
Yep.
So continually adding doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, if you turn the guitar volume down, so if you just have a listen to this.
Yeah.
So that extra noise floor that, you know, when you run them all in together. But, you know, good buffers, you can handle having a few on the board.
A few, which you may well have if you've got a bunch of Boss pedals and some other stuff, and you know you may very well have a bunch of buffers. Well,
there you go.
Okay, we've got to do the overdrive thing.
We do. Okay,
so just quickly through. Are we going to have the buffers before or after?
Let's do them after.
Yeah.
For a couple of reasons. We're going to hear a buffer before on. We've got a board that we're going to have a look at.
Yeah.
And we're going to hear the buffer before on that. I personally much prefer a buffer after the overdrive pedal for a couple of reasons. When a designer is designing a pedal, they'll design it with the guitar plugged into the input. If they want to buffer that input, there'll be a buffer there. But a lot of the time, that dynamic and the relationship between the output impedance of the guitar and the input of the pedal, it's all based around that design. If I put a buffer in front of that, I mean, lots of pedals can handle that fine, but some can't.
Yeah.
You know,
so it wants to see high impedance from your guitar.
It wants to see what's coming out of here.
Yeah, and if you add the buffer, you're going to make that impedance change. It's going to be a low impedance signal, and that means that this and these don't work the same.
It will be different than the designer had intended. And what I want to happen with the pedal is I want it to work as the designer had intended.
Okay.
Right? That's just me. So let's have a listen to the buffers after the TS9.
So I'll dial this tube screamer in then to something I find acceptable.
Okay. Here we go. Okay.
I don't hate that. I don't hate that at all.
Right, so what we've got there, I think the output impedance of the TS9 is, I think it's 1.1k or whatever, but it's about 1k.
Yeah.
So now we're going to start, we'll hear the buffers after the TS9, and I'll just start adding them in one at a time.
I'll keep the volume on full, and then we'll do a very brief volume down after.
Yep. Cool.
Shouldn't make as much difference because it is buffered. I don't know whether my ears are broken, but I wasn't hearing a colossal difference.
No, of course. So, because we've already got our buffer circuit, we've already got a low impedance signal after the tube screamer,
Yeah.
right? When we put the buffer circuit after that again, it's like this.
But I have a question. Yeah.
Okay,
go
all
on.
right. You've got, what's your favourite raincoat? What's the one that you wore the other day? That really lovely one on your bike?
No, that's my motorbike jacket.
Oh, sorry, we don't call that a raincoat. Under no circumstances we call that a raincoat.
Yeah, it's a very nice cotton wax jacket by a very trendy brand.
All right, cotton wax jacket, trendy brand. All right?
Yeah.
Keeps the rain off.
Yeah.
Right? But it's really nice.
Not as well as modern synthetics, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, well, my point is, if you bought that as a raincoat and you had a Bolivian beeswax rubbed into the thing, and it's like it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
But if I grab my Mac
Yeah.
and I stick it on, I'm going to keep the same rain off.
It still keeps the rain
It
off.
still keeps the rain off. It's doing the same job.
On all of the other buffers that we've got there,
Yep.
Details of which will have been on screen. There's nothing we can do about that buffer circuit in the bypass state, is there? Or indeed when it's turned on, if it's a standalone buffer. We can't affect that in any way. There's one there that's got two controls on.
Ah, the Kingsley.
Yes.
Yes. So
I really think we should explain what those two controls do
Okay.
before we move on.
Sure. So we've got, there's the output impedance. So
Yeah.
basically it goes from a really low output impedance to a high output impedance.
I think we should hear it, Dan.
Right, let's do that. So all that's doing, it's not a tone control, it's changing the output impedance of that buffer.
Literally sounds like turning the presence down.
There you go.
And the treble in your amp.
There you go.
But you're saying all it's doing is making it more impedance.
It's adding the impedance on the output, therefore it's unable to drive the capacitance afterwards.
So now then, what very, very brief summary, we know that the longer your pipe gets, the harder it is to get a signal through it
Yep.
and to the amp. And that's not just cable, that's other devices that may load it on the way.
Indeed.
So in order to do that, we add our pump, as it were, which
Yes.
is a buffer.
Yes.
And we've gone through 7 different buffers and we've decided they don't sound radically different.
That's right. They were doing the same job.
But there's definitely one or two that I personally prefer the feel of in this environment with this guitar and that amp.
Perfect.
We haven't done any humbuckers yet. Maybe we'll do that in a minute.
Yep.
Because that will change everything
Well,
again.
see, again, as explained in the first video, that has to do with the inductance of the coils. It's like, it's easier for a low, so the output of the Strat, for example, low inductance coils, it's got a lower output impedance, that guitar. And therefore, the lower output impedance of the Strat and the Tele, it's easier for the guitars to drive the capacitance in the cable. We might get more output from a Les Paul or from the humbuckers, but the higher inductance means we're going to have a higher output impedance, which means it's harder for that signal to drive the capacitance in the cable.
That is, you might need to rewind that and just listen to it a couple of times because that is utterly fascinating. It sounds contradictory,
Yeah.
but from a playing perspective, it explains so much of why I struggled with humbuckers for so many years.
So think about this. Your vintage Alnico magnets in the humbucker. Gorgeous, right?
Like a Gibson PAF, for
Like
example.
a Gibson PAF, for example. Now, the low wind on that pickup will mean less inductance and easier job it's going to have of driving the coil. However, if we make that beefy and we get more signal, it's like, okay, but now suddenly the pickup's darker. If I take out that low, the low magnet and I put like a really strong ceramic magnet, it will actually reduce the amount of inductance in the coil.
Oh my God.
Making it so that's one of the reasons why we put a strong ceramic magnet in, and suddenly it's like, oh, it's bright again.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? So it's like everything affects everything.
It's so basic, and yet it's so flipping enlightening.
It is. So this is a big ecosystem, right? Just because a buffer has got a certain, you can't just look at it in math and go, oh, well, that's what I need. It's like, no, you got to use your ears and think of it as one big thing that works together.
So I have to pick a buffer, don't I?
Pick a buffer.
Well, my favourite one is the Klon one.
Let's use the Klon.
But I think that's too confusing because people don't have clones, and I think the discussion is around, should I add a buffer to my pedal board?
Okay.
So I think, well, the op amp one is my favourite sounding one.
Right.
But the flying buttress one is more interesting because we can vary.
Well, let's use the flying buttress then.
That output impedance. So in choosing this one, I want to point out that with that output impedance
all the way down,
it's essentially like having
it's just a standard buffer,
another buffer, even though it does have a valve in it. But I think having the adjustability there might help explain some of the concepts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
let's do it. Back in the room. Okay, so
almost the normal human pedal board.
Almost. The buffer at the moment is not connected.
Yeah.
Okay. So the signal path is your guitar is going into the fuzz.
Yeah.
Into the D&M drive.
Correct.
Into the harmonious monk.
No.
Into the AIDX20 delay.
Yeah.
Into the harmonious monk to the output.
Yes. For anyone confused by that, I use it in harmonic tremolo mode, and that would have been in the amp, which is why I have it last.
Of course, makes complete sense. So let's have a listen.
Just give you a quick flick through of some of the sounds. There's one thing in particular I want to demonstrate that happens that's a problem that we've looked at before.
Okay.
If you're confused, all this is the controller for the delay. It's not doing anything other than helping it do modulation and some of that stuff. So, yes, just make sure we're on the right one. Something like that. Okay, so guitar straight into the amp. We've got all of these pedals are true bypass, so there's no buffered
signal anywhere.
No. This will be guitar going into 15, 20, 35 feet of cable.
Yep.
Into the amp.
Yep.
Yeah. Here's the guitar going down 20 feet of cable into the amp, not through all those true bypass pedals. So I've just spent 400 quid on a pedal board, 300 pounds on a fuzz, 250 on a delay, 250 on an overdrive, 250 on one of those, and however much that is, loads of money to make my guitar sound palpably worse.
Right. It's a dilemma. Let's spend some more money, make it sound better, shall we? Right.
It does rather tee up the whole buffers question so very nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, let's turn some stuff on so you can have a quick listen to what happens next.
was wonderful.
It's been a while.
Wonderful.
It's been a while. It's been a while since the 2-Rock has been hit with such interesting items.
Okay, so
Yeah.
very special, right?
Yes. 2 problems, though.
2 problems.
One significant one, which has been a problem in this. So let's recap and say all of this is utterly dependent on the length of your cable.
Yep.
And what your pedals are.
Yep.
And what the
Guitarist putting out.
We've chosen
all
this
that
amp
stuff.
really deliberately because it is viciously revealing of anything that happens in front of it.
Totally.
And one of the things that I discovered when I got it, and this will be the same for any of you who use a fairly high headroom cleanish amp, but any amp really. When I've got me Overdrive on,
Yep.
if you could turn the delay on. I'm going to turn the delay level down so you're not hearing the delay.
Sure.
What you're going to hear is what happens when we turn the delay on. So, D&M drive,
Yep.
relatively high output impedance,
Not crazy high, but
gets dropped
gets dropped by the delay.
by the delay,
Yeah.
and therefore pushes everything through. And I hear a fizzy on top of my
Original.
overdrive.
Sure.
Now, I'm just going to turn the fuzz down a bit because it is sort of set to stun. This is way worse.
Yep. That's the big one, right? But it's a better example of what's going on with the D&M,
Yes,
right?
because the output impedance of the secret machine presumably is way higher.
Exactly that.
Yeah,
Exactly
okay.
that.
And we've done whole videos on that.
Yeah. So there's basically an output impedance mismatch.
And it's
going
not
on
just
there.
the delay that does it. The Monk does it as well.
Of course, yeah. Anything that's going to change that
Yeah.
to a lower output impedance. One of the things about fuzzes, what we generally want is a high input impedance and a low output impedance. Fuzz is the opposite. It's got a low output impedance and a low input impedance and a high output impedance. Now they sound fantastic, but that's the big issue with using buffers with fuzz pedals. So the first thing, let's have a listen to what the buffer sounds like at the front of the fuzz.
So the reason in this case that might be relevant to you, you've come a lot. You've got to this point where you go, okay, I've got this inconsistency in what's happening when I'm turning my pedals on and off
Yep.
in terms of feel and response and
Yep.
tone. So what I need to do is add a buffer,
Yes.
which is going to even that out so that I don't get that inconsistency.
Exactly.
So the next question is,
where does it go?
where do I put it?
Yeah, where does it go? We're going to try 3 different places.
Yep.
We're going to try before the fuzz, before the overdrives. Going to try after the fuzz and after the overdrives, but before everything else. And then we're going to try right at the end.
Great.
Okay?
That makes sense.
Let's start with a buffer at the very start.
I'll just remind you of the sound of the fuzz. I'll do a bit of neck pickup and a bit of bridge pickup stuff.
And then the next time you hear it will be the
the
buffer
buffer.
at the front. Okay.
Yeah. Two things.
Right.
Sounded great.
Yeah.
Didn't sound massively different.
It's very interesting, isn't it?
Did that sound different to you?
It did. Oh, hang on.
Can you try and just turn the input impedance down and just make sure it is actually plugged in?
Let me just... This is going up there. The input, yeah, that's right. There's the input there, and then out of that. Yeah.
Just
What I'll do... Oh, I can't just that bloody switch on it.
just do the just
Yep.
turn the thing down just to make sure it is actually on.
Okay. Just humour me for 1 second.
Colour me confused. I was expecting that to sound so horrific. It wasn't. We wouldn't. Dan's going to get another one just to see.
Just play that for us there. Likes a buffer at the input. Oh my god!
But yeah, just say that line again because it was
Okay.
over the trails.
I think we found the only fuzz in the world that really likes a buffer at the input.
Dan, you continue to surprise us. Dan Drive, that is. That actually sounds great. And I tell you what's interesting. I can hear that the tube screamer's in there because I've now got this high end back in the 2-rock.
Right. Wow.
It sounds really nice.
Can we stick just a normal germanium fuzz in there just so we can show quickly what the normal issue is, because that's weird.
While we do this, I mean, it is very indicative of the problem, isn't it? Because everything's different.
Totally. Fascinating.
If only we had some rubbishy old...
Indeed.
It's actually not germanium, it's silicon, but I don't think it's going to matter too much.
So the buffer is in.
Yeah. I don't quite know where we are with the fuzz face.
Right, we'll take the buffer out then.
So what I noticed is I chose this fuzz very deliberately because it cleans up exceptionally well. And it wasn't cleaning up at all with the buffer in front of it.
There we go. That's a better example. So we heard it with the buffer at the front to start with, and then I've taken the buffer out. So now all we're hearing is the fuzz face in the amp.
So now we need to hear with the buffer after then, don't we?
Let's hear it with the buffer after.
That top end nastiness, which sounds like a super reverb with a bright switch on going into a Kemper, is what I hate about buffers.
Right.
So I'm guessing we're going to turn that impedance down to see what happens. Better. Still don't love it.
Yeah.
Compared to nothing there at all.
Sure. So fuzzers are a really
special case.
Very special case.
I think what we should do is head back to normal land, concentrate on the D&M drive, bit of delay, and then just see. Because fuzzes are such a special case.
Yeah.
We've done shows. We probably will do them in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so we'll go back to normal land and then we'll hear the buffer in front of and then behind the D&M drive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we do a finger snap?
Better. Okay, so we've now moved the buffer to after the secret machine, after the fuzz, but before the D&M drive, before our overdrive.
Yeah, so we're going to not concentrate on the fuzz. It's really now about your sort of core overdrive.
Yep.
Sounds.
Exactly.
Fair?
Very fair.
Okay. God, you should play the guitar really.
No, I'm good. I'm really enjoying just listening to you with the Stratton of the Two Rock. Seriously, I'm loving it.
We didn't do any humbuckers. All the humbuckers people have turned off.
So we will hear the buffer now.
So what's really interesting is there's a real nasal honk
as you change the input impedance.
As I change the input impedance. And I'm hearing that sizzly stuff up top that I don't much like, but I know does work in a mix.
Right.
That seems to work okay. Also, the guitar stayed lovely and bright when I turned it down, which is not normal.
Right.
Not my normal experience, even with the D&M drive. So I'm guessing that's what the buffer is doing ahead of the D&M drive.
Yep.
Anything to add?
A lot of my favourite pedals for working off the volume control do have a relatively low input impedance.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, some of them are down at 100K.
Fuzz face being a good.
Fuzz face is a really good example, right?
Yeah.
With that low input impedance.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of other overdrives that have got that low input impedance that work beautifully off the volume control. Now, when you increase the output impedance of the flying buttress, you're basically changing that dynamic.
Yeah.
So it's seeing basically more of a load at the input, the same way as it would be as if you had a higher input impedance at the pedal, and you're getting that same effect. So it's, again, these are things that the designer will incorporate in, when they're making design choices about the pedal, what that input impedance is going to be. But you can see how important it is to get that right.
God, it's massive. Okay, what I'm going to do now is we'll put the output impedance back to
low, super low.
Low. I'm just going to pick a sound and play a bit. And what you'll hear is the buffer before the D&M drive, and then you're going to hear it after the D&M drive.
Okay.
Sorry, loads of single coil hum there, but okay.
What are you feeling?
Well, I actually really liked the first sound.
Right.
I really liked it.
The buffer into the D&M.
Yeah, there was a lot of brightness.
Right.
And very sort of just clean presency, high frequency in there. But I don't think it's just about everything's relative, right? So you're noticing it in the high frequency, but it's having a significant effect on the upper mid-range as well.
Yeah.
Certainly with it after was more familiar to me in terms of a sound that I would use. But what I found most interesting of all was turning the analog man delay on and off didn't make the massive difference that it makes with no buffer.
Right.
And we're sort of labouring the point here. Back to the bit where we introduced this pedal board, turning that delay on and off added significant extra, it then dropped the output impedance enough to be able to push whatever capacitance
is going
in the rest of the signal flow through, which it wouldn't do when it was off. And same with the Monk will do the same thing. So I think I prefer it after. I know that for my sort of standard use, I would prefer it after, because before, again, it does change the relationship of, the volume control.
Got one more thing to try then. I'm going to try it at the very end of everything.
All right.
Okay?
Yep.
And
snapper
should be.
Yeah. It's always dangerous.
Okay, so now go through some sounds.
All right.
Right, including the fuzz, add some delay, and just go through some sounds and see how that feels with the buffer at the end of everything.
So this is buffer at the end.
Buffer at the end. Start with nothing on. No pedals on.
What I can tell you is I know there's a buffer in there
Sure.
for this. Sounds like a super reverb bright switch
Okay.
to me.
Okay.
And I don't hate it, don't get me wrong. I think it's great for that clean stuff. I think
Sure.
it's wonderful for the clean stuff.
Awesome.
Minor third bend with your index finger on the G string.
Very good. Very impressive. Well done, mate. Well done.
Ouchie. Yeah, I mean, okay. Very indulgent for me, because those are the sounds that I love, and
Yeah.
it's loud as pigs in here. It really is crazy loud.
Glorious.
And what I was finding was that with the buffer in all the time, I wasn't surprised.
Okay.
So I turned the fuzz on, and it was exactly as I expected.
Right.
No huge problem with kind of like.
Sure. Yep.
So it's a massive grey area, isn't it?
you can start with, if you know what's going on and you know, okay, cable capacitance, inductance, all that stuff, then you've got a place to start. But it's only a place to start because there is no substitute for getting your hands dirty with this stuff. Every pedal is going to be different. Every board's going to be different. You just got to sit down and take the time, because it might be you put a buffer at the very beginning and you go, hey, everything sounds fantastic. Well, and if that's the case, amazing.
What will definitely come up in the comments section is, look, just use an input and an output buffer and just forget about all this trouble. But to me, that creates a whole bunch of sounds I don't want to hear from certain pedals. It is much, much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, totally. The one thing about having the buffer right at the very end is that you have consistency with your output impedance. And then you can set the amp where you like it, and then...
That's it.
And then work on what's going before it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's thinking about it as an ecosystem rather than as a... I don't know what the analogy would be there, but it's not like a fix-all.
That's right.
It's you have to use it within the system rather than as an addition to the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So let's recap.
Just to finally say, it does explain why I love the clon in my signal chain so much.
Yeah.
Because
it's doing the job.
Before I got into having true bypass switches and all of that, it was just always there.
Doing its thing.
Doing that levelling out job, for want of a better word.
Yep. So let's ask the question then.
Yep.
Do I need a buffer? When do I need a buffer? And the reality is, lots of times you don't need one. As Mick was saying, when he's using his clon, there is one there. There's one there doing its job.
Another example of that would be loads of people like to use the Catlin Bred Belly Pop Deluxe in their signal chain in trails mode, which means it is non-true bypass. It has a buffer turned on.
If you've got this sat at the end of your signal chain, you don't need a buffer. It's doing the job.
It's doing the job.
That's the point. It's like, if you understand in your signal chain what pedals are what and what job they're doing, the reality is you might not need one. Now, if you're using a load of true bypass pedals, then you might need one.
We proved it, didn't we? We plugged in just that board there, and that's only 5 really crazy high quality pedals.
Yep.
4, not counting the buffer.
4 plus extra.
Yeah. And even that, with 35 feet of cable and just the board itself, was making a significant difference.
Totally. A quick fix, if you want to try, if you use something like a Boss tuner, and a lot of us do, it might be, instead of having the Boss tuner at the very start of your signal chain, just take it out.
Put it at the end.
Put it at the end. That's a really simple way of experimenting where you put your buffer. So, you might not need one, depending on the pedals that you're using, but there might be a really simple way for you to take what you've got now and see if you do need a buffer, see if it helps.
Yeah. Seems to me, speaking purely personally, and you can adapt this to your own needs, and actually it would be great to get Dan's input on this as well. You haven't played all video, mate. I feel really bad.
No, seriously.
You haven't played all video, and we've only heard one guitar.
I've sat down here with that and the 2 Rock loud, and I was like, let's just keep talking about buffers for hours and hours and hours. My reasoning, this is absolutely glorious.
My reasoning for not picking up humbuckers in the end was because at least we've kept one thing constant.
Yeah,
and that's the guitar. So, but it will be different with different pickups, obviously. It seems to me, from my perspective, then the advantages are
too much perspective.
It's too much perspective. You've gone out there, you've got a lovely amp, you've got a lovely guitar, and we get this in the comments. We get, I just love the sound of my guitar plugged into my amp, and when I plug my pedal board in, it just sounds a bit dull. Well, what you've probably got there is a bunch of true bypass pedals, a whole big run of cable, and you're losing, the build-up of capacitance in that whole signal chain. It's not happening. So number 1, a buffer as a leveler.
Yep.
A consistency driver, as it were, and as he just said, any Boss pedal with an always-on buffer is going to do that job for you.
Yeah. And as we heard in the start, it's not as if they're bad buffers.
No.
Important to remember that not all Boss buffers are the same. They've used a bunch of different designs over the years.
Oh, goody.
But yeah, I mean, another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're fine.
Yeah.
They're, I hear people all the time say, "Oh, Boss buffers are rubbish." Actually, no, they're not. They're, we're lucky enough to we've been to see the guys at the Boss. They're really good.
Yeah, yeah.
They really know their stuff. So, there are other buffers as we looked at and different ways of achieving the same result, and you might prefer those ways, like the Kingsley Flown Buttress valve buffer, gorgeous.
I'm going to stick my neck out and say, having done that trick where we turned all the buffers on, I would definitely prefer a board full of true bypass pedals and 1 or 2 buffer solutions,
Sure,
than having to fight 8 buffers.
absolutely.
That would be something. So then the other 2 benefits for me are, rolling out the consistency argument is to go, when I turn my fuzz on, I'm not getting any huge surprises, and when I turn my delay on after my overdrive, I'm not getting any huge surprises.
Absolutely.
Because the effect isn't there. And then lastly, certainly for single coil players, actually probably just as much for humbucker players if you've got vintage PAFs, maybe even more so for humbucker players if you've got vintage PAFs. It makes this thing much more usable again.
Totally.
Because you don't get that high-end roll-off when you turn the guitar down. So if you want that, it could be a really great way of not having to install a treble bleed mod.
Sure.
Which has got a whole load of other problems. What about you then, Dan? Come on, you've done all the science and you've done all the explaining. Where are buffers on your board?
I have... It all depends on the sound I'm using. But generally, with the pedal when it's on, with all my stuff is low output impedance. And I am using reverb for most of it. So for me,
it's always
my
on
always
anyway.
on buffer is my CXM 1978.
Yeah.
That's my buffer.
And you don't need to add any more buffers to that.
No, it's magic.
Yeah.
And I've got a big pedal board, but it's all going through the switches. So it's only, if I'm just using a reverb, then that's all I've got. So for me, the most important thing, like getting to grips with all this and getting to grips with all the science and stuff, and it is fascinating, and like understanding the, when I talked before in the video about that, the frequency, about that inductive frequency.
Yeah.
And understanding that actually what I might be hearing isn't just the bright guitar, but the capacitive load moving that frequency down the spectrum.
Yeah, there was definitely a case of that when we turned the knob on the buttress.
Yeah, look, the thing is, but you can understand all this stuff. You can really understand the science of it. And I'm lucky enough to have some really clever engineers that I work with, and we sit down and go through this stuff. But until you sit down and plug a guitar into something and go, listen to this, and you go, oh, and then you try and quantify what's going on. But there's no way that you can sit down and go, like really understand what's going on until you plug a guitar in, until you get your hands dirty. That's my only thing. Know all about the stuff. It's fantastic. It means nothing unless you sit down and listen to what's going on. And at the end of the day, the only real judge of this stuff, of whether it's working or not in your rig, is how it sounds and how it feels to play. And that's the bottom line for me.
Happy days.
But it is fascinating, though.
It really is fascinating. If it's, I think I am now convinced that some sort of buffering, if I'm going to commit to using that kind of fuzz, I really don't want one after the fuzz face.
No.
Really don't want a buffer anywhere near that signal chain.
Yeah.
And a separate buffer, that is.
Mm-hmm.
But switching the clon on sounds great. Go figure. Go figure.
Fantastic. There you go. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. Again, please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. A massive thank you to our preferred retailers in the UK and Europe is...
Anderson's Music of Guildford in Surrey.
And our dear friends in Australia.
Pedal Empire of Brisbane, Queensland.
And we also have some links in the description.
We do. If you click on those links for the USA, they'll take you to sweetwater.com, where if you buy stuff, Dan and I get a kickback off that, and it helps us fund this show.
Indeed. Also in the description is a lot more information about things in the show, so please read that. Mick does an amazing job of doing that stuff. Also, massive thank you to our patrons on Patreon.
Thank you kindly.
Yeah, thank you so much for your support. And finally, massive thanks to anyone that's gone to thatpedalshowstore.com and grabbed t-shirts and hats. And
We will have some seasonal items.
We
in
will.
soon.
They look pretty
given
snazzy too.
That it is the season to be jolly,
Indeed, indeed.
or is fast approaching that, which is scary.
I know. So again, thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on Monday for VCQ, where we can get into some serious online arguments about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I need to lie down.
Have a great week. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.